whistle stop through the main things that you need to know as an entrepreneur. I'm going to start off with this disclaimer because I'm Laura and I can't help it. So you understand that this is just for educational purposes. You haven't hired me, and you know that because nobody has passed hands yet, right? So a little bit about me. I'm a mom of three. So the quarantine has been particularly interesting for me. I've been a business and tax lawyer for 13 years now. I have a master's from Cambridge University in the UK and a master's in business and tax law from Osgoode in Toronto. And I am an entrepreneur myself. My father and I have a line of Caribbean syrups. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, your startup, so business structures, how are you going to own your business when you start? As you start to grow, what are the contracts that you need? As you build your team, what do you need to know? And as you build your brand, what are some of the intellectual property considerations? And then quite often when we start, we're not thinking about the end, but it's really important that we think from the beginning about how it is that we want to exit our businesses and how are we going to leave a legacy for the next generation, which is particularly important in our community. So first up, how do you own your business? Tanya talks a little bit about it over on the show, but in Canada, there are three main ways in which you can own a business. You can have a sole proprietorship, which is essentially you've just decided that you run a business. There's no legal separation between the business and you. You can have a partnership, which is essentially a sole proprietorship with more than one person, or you can have a corporation. And a corporation is a separate legal entity. It's considered by law to be a legal person with the same powers and the same rights and everything else as a flesh and blood person. So if you think of it, those of you who have children, you know, when the mom is pregnant, that's kind of like a sole proprietorship. The business, the mom and the baby don't have any legal separation. When that child is born and grows up and becomes 19 and goes off to college and signs a lease, he can sign a lease on his own, right? It's a separate legal entity. And because of that status as a separate legal entity, a corporation can allow you some flexibility in your business that you might not necessarily have if you're running it as a sole proprietorship or a partnership. Before we go any further, I'm going to do a crash course on some of the terms that I'm going to use. So a share in a corporation is literally that. It's a piece of the pie. Now you can have all kinds of different shares. You can have shares that entitle you to the underlying assets. You can have shares that entitle you to vote. You can have shares that give you a guaranteed dividend, shares that are paid out in preference to other shares. But essentially, it's having a piece of the pie. It's having a stake in the corporation. A dividend is if at the end of the year or at the end of the quarter, you've made a profit, you can say, I'm going to share some or all of this profit with all of the shareholders or some of the shareholders of the corporation. And capital gains, anyone in real estate will know this is essentially the difference between what you bought something for and what you sell it for. And it's not just in real estate, it applies to businesses as well. And we'll get to that when we talk about how you exit your business. So advantages and disadvantages of incorporation. It's the question that I get asked the most frequently. Should I incorporate? When should I incorporate? Is there a certain revenue level at which I should incorporate? And the answer is really, it depends, right? So one of the key advantages is limited liability. Because your corporation is a separate legal entity and you run your business through this separate legal entity, any liabilities, any claims, any debts that come up in that corporation, they don't leak into your personal assets. So if you're a sole proprietor and you're running a business and someone sues you, they are suing you, which means your house, your car, the money in the bank, all of that is available to satisfy a claim. If someone sues your corporation, they are suing a separate legal person, and only the assets of the corporation are available. Now, there's some exceptions, and Tanya may talk about it later. If you're not running your corporation properly, if you're mixing personal and business expenses, or if you've signed as a personal guarantor of the debts of your corporation, or if you haven't completed all the formalities, so issuing shares and passing resolutions, if you don't have any of that, then the law will say you're not treating it as a separate legal entity, so neither will we, right? That's what the courts will say. But if you follow all of the guidelines and you treat your corporation as a separate legal entity, you benefit from that limited liability. It's got perpetual existence, right? At some point we will die. A corporation can live on forever. That's so important when we're trying to build businesses that we can pass on through the generations. Income flexibility. So if you are running your business as a sole proprietorship, money comes in as revenue, you pay all your business expenses. What's left over at the end of the year is your profit. And CRA does not care whether you spend that money this year. They don't care whether you plan to reinvest it into the business next year. They're not interested in any of that. You're going to pay tax on all of the profit. If you are running your business as a corporation, you can decide how much to take out for yourself if there's profit left over at the end of the year, and how much to leave in the business. And the money that you leave in the corporation is going to be taxed at a lower rate. If you're making under 500,000 in Ontario, it's 12.2%, which is much lower than most personal tax rates. And so you can leave that money in the corporation, and you can leave it for a rainy day. You can leave it to reinvest in the next year. You can buy insurance. You can do all kinds of things. And now you have more money to do it with because you've paid a lot less in tax. Ease of financing. So one, banks will much prefer for you to be a corporation, but also suppose you don't want to take on debt. Maybe you want to have investors instead. If you're a sole proprietor, the only way you can take on additional money that you haven't, sold your product or service for is for someone to lend you money, because you can't sell you, right? You can't sell, hopefully you won't sell a kidney or a right arm. The only way is to take on debt. But if you own a corporation, you can sell shares. You can say, I think this is going to blow up. Come and buy 10% of my company for X amount. And you can use that money to fund the growth of the business in a way that doesn't require you personally to have to pay it back. And then transferability of ownership is just easier to sell a corporation. So one, being incorporated is going to make your business more attractive. So say you're in a service business, and for services, the big thing is the contracts that you have, right? It's the relationships that you have with your clients. If you're a sole proprietor and I have a contract with you and you sell your business to someone else, I have no obligation to do business with that person. And they know that when they're buying the business from you. Whereas if I have a contract with your corporation and now you've sold the shares of that corporation, I still am bound by the contract. The corporation hasn't gone anywhere. It's just owned by someone else. So it makes your business a lot more attractive. So I've talked about all the wonderful things of incorporation. You can tell I'm a big fan of corporations, but there's always a catch. So essentially, they're more expensive to maintain. You have to pay for the initial cost. You also have increased accounting on a yearly basis because now you're paying for 2 tax returns instead of 1. And you have to, every time you make a big decision, you have to include it in your minute book. You have to pass a resolution. And so it is more difficult and a little bit more expensive to maintain. And also, if you are still employed, so say this is a side hustle and you're still an employee, one of the disadvantages of incorporating is if you are making losses in your business, you can't then use those losses to reduce your personal incomes. If you're a sole proprietor, expenses get taken away from taxable income. What's left is what you get taxed at. If you have a lot of losses in your business, it's going to reduce the amount of money you have to pay in tax. If you run a corporation and their losses, those losses are frozen in the corporation. Okay, so when you're making a determination as to whether you should incorporate or not, you need to look at the totality. What is it that you're planning to do with your business? Are you going to have more than one person in your business? Do you want to sell this at some point? All of those things will factor in, and not just, if you hit a particular figure. All right. One of my other favorite things to talk about is contracts. So I talked a little bit during the podcast, and my view is a contract is the story of the relationship. And if you view it when we watch a movie or we read a novel, it's the same elements. So the parties are the characters. The plot is what you expect to happen. And the only difference really is that contracts have kind of an alternative ending, right? So what if all of these things that we don't really want to happen, but what if they do happen? And what are the consequences to that? The key things that you need to have in a contract to make sure that you are going to, one, get paid, and that you're going to be able to exit it if necessary. You need to have a really clear scope of work clause. You need to be as detailed as possible in terms of what it is that you need to provide or what it is the person that you're contracting with needs to provide. A lot of the disputes happen there because people had misunderstandings as to what was expected. You also need a really clear fees and payment clause. Do you provide refunds? If not, put that in the contract. Are you scared that people are going to do chargebacks after they've given you their credit card? Put that in the contract. You want to be really clear about how people can pay you and when you're not in the position to give money back. And then kind of an exit clause, a cancellation or termination clause. What are the circumstances under which you can terminate the contract? So say, for example, we've been having a lot of, it's been eye-opening, some of the people who we thought perhaps were done with the community and have not been. And so say you had sponsorship arrangements with people who've shown themselves to really not be done with the community. If you had a termination clause that allowed you to terminate the contract, if someone's behavior, was harmful to your brand, you would be able to get out of that without any further liability. As you grow, you're going to want to build your team. One of the key things that you need to make a determination of is your team member an employee or an independent contractor? And there's unfortunately no bright line. There's no, if this person does this, then they're absolutely an employee. And if they do that, they're absolutely independent contractor. The courts and CRA will tend to look at, does it fall more into column A or more into column B? But generally speaking, the more control you have over someone, the more likely they're going to be an employee. So if you can tell them when to be at work and how to accomplish their work, and they get the same amount kind of, regardless of what they do, then that person is likely to be an employee. An independent contractor has a lot more flexibility in when they work, how they produce the end product. They quite often will work for other people. That's more likely to be an independent contractor. The key thing to bear in mind is, even if you call someone an independent contractor, if they actually are an employee, the Labor Board and CRA don't care what your contract says. It's what really is the case. And what sometimes happens is that you will have team members who want to be independent contractors because then you don't have to take any deductions from their pay. But when that team member becomes ill or disabled or goes on maternity leave, then they want to be an employee because they want EI. And then all of a sudden you now have to pay all the penalties and back deductions and interest because that person actually was an employee. The other thing I want to touch on briefly is in your contracts with employees and independent contractors, quite often these people are getting, like, you're opening the kimono to your business, right? You're sharing the secret sauce. And you have to, in a sense. Like, if these people are going to help you grow your business so that you can go work in your genius, you have to share some information with them. But that can be scary because what if they take that information and use it to compete against you? You can cover that in a contract. You can have non-disclosure, non-competition, non-solicitation clauses which say, listen, I'm sharing this information with you, but you can't use it to try to solicit and bring, entice away my clients or my customers. You can't use it to go do something that's similar to mine and compete with me, right? And those are key parts of any contract with a team member. As you build your brand, as you become more visible and you have a great logo or a really creative name or a tagline, you want to make sure that you're protecting that. So trademarks are anything that's associated with your business, anything that distinguishes your business in the marketplace. It could be a logo, a name, it could be packaging. If you package in a particular way, if you have a salon that has a particular fragrance, it could be the fragrance, but it has to be related to business. And there's a cautionary story with Black Girl Magic hashtag, where the person who had originated it never made any money from it, never did any merchandise. And then Essence Magazine filed a trademark application for Black Girls Magic for a magazine. And the originator of the phrase was like, everyone knows I created it. The court didn't care. And the same thing would happen in Canada because we have similar rules in that regard. Because it was never a business activity, she couldn't actually prevent them from being able to get trademark protection. So if your brand is a really important part of your business, it's worthwhile to look into protecting it. And even if you're not at the point where you want to register trademark, do a Google alert. Make sure that no one else is using it. Do a periodic sweep of social media to make sure that no one else is using your name or your logo, because you don't want people to think that they're doing business with you when they're really doing business with someone else. And then my favorite part. So my goal in life, my parents and I are originally from Barbados, and I am happiest when I am on the beach with something fruity and alcoholic. And at some point, we have to exit our business, right? At some point, you will hopefully, at some point you will start working. It makes sense thinking about it from now. Do you want to pass this on to the next generation? Are you building your business up to sell? Are you essentially going to fund your own retirement and just retire from the business and the business will end? The reason why that's important is because it determines, or it helps you decide what structures you're going to put in place. So did you know that if you sell the shares of a Canadian controlled private corporation, and there's capital gains because the business has increased in value, you will get a capital gains exemption of $864,000, it goes up each year, per shareholder. You don't get that exemption if you're a sole proprietor or a partnership. So you want to think about what it is that you want to do at the end, because that's going to make a difference as to what you do now. I have a free resource if you go to Henry Business Law / secure checklist, which is really a checklist of all the legal things that you need to deal with as a startup. It goes into greater detail than I could today. Please go check that out. And if you have any questions, please.